Controllers. If you play fighting games, you've either picked your preference or you've gone through the myriad of them. I'm a big pad player. I tend to play on the PS4 controller. I'm actually starting to even favor the PS5 controller. And on the rare occasion, I'll even bust out the Xbox One when I'm playing on PC, even though this has mostly been delegated to shooters for me now. Back here, I have an old nostalgic piece for me, the Mad Catz 2 Marvel vs. Capcom Tournament Edition arcade stick. Back in the day, you weren't a good fighting game player unless you had one of these. That's a big quote unquote, but the general consensus is that if you wanted to play professionally or at a high level, you needed a fight stick. Now we've got different options and leverless controllers between the Hitbox and the MixBox. You have to kind of pick your preference as far as which one you would prefer. I definitely am somebody who would favor the MixBox. I like up, down, left, right arrow keys. Instead of spending $400 for a MixBox, I picked up this budget option and the PXN X8, mostly with the goal of seeing if this style of controller is worth investing that much money into. $450 is a lot of money for a controller. Mind you, cheaper if you want the PS4 version, but the MixBox Universal, which has PS5 compatibility, which I really like, cost that extra $100. I don't even want to think about shipping and tax on that. However, the PXN X8, only $60. I think even with tax, probably no more than $65, actually got delivered to my house in a day. Depends on where you live, but got delivered to me I ordered it in the morning and it was at my house at 8 p.m. What are the differences with this controller? Will this work for you? My goal with today's video is to cover both my experience with the controller and the differences between this and the big boy in the MixBox to let you know whether or not you should waste your money on one of these. Give you as much information as I can to let you make an educated decision for yourself. So let's talk about the PXN X8 Fight Box. One of the first things you're going to want to note with this device is the fact that these are, though they are 30 millimeter sized buttons, these are not your traditional Sanwa buttons. If you guys have played on general arcade sticks like that TE back there, you would know the feel of Sanwa buttons. These are all mechanical switches. I believe cherry blues throughout the entire device. I'm gonna show you a quick sound sample so you get an idea of just how loud and tactile this device is, because some of you are gonna like that and some of you are not gonna like that. I tend to like the loud buttons. They're ASMR for me, but they might not be for you. So here's a quick sample of what this controller sounds like. So as you can see from that sample, very loud. You're gonna hear this the whole time. If you're the type of competitor that's worried about your opponent hearing you trying to mash wake up super, okay, if I'm on the ground and you have Oki and we're at an offline and you hear this, okay, you know I'm mashing something. So that could bother you. Generally for playing online at home, obviously they can't hear you, but it depends whether or not the noise bothers you. It does not bother me, but it is very noisy. Again, though, it is very tactile. So there is good feedback when you press a button. You know you've pressed the button because you will get the tactile mechanical feedback you do from a general mechanical keyboard. The entire box is made up of those switches. The PCB board inside is fairly simple. I actually had issues with this device when I first received it. I'm going to show you the guts of this device later in the video. I want to talk about more of the features first before we really start tearing this thing apart, because then I got to put it all back together again, and that's annoying. So the next question is, what does it feel like to play with, to do combos with? There's one thing I have to explain to you conceptually, and some of you are going to understand what this is, and some of you are going to need this definition. SOCD cleaning is a big thing for leverless controllers like this. SOCD stands for simultaneous opposing cardinal directions, and if that sounds complicated to you, it's a lot simpler than you believe it is. It is the difference of what happens when you are holding two buttons that are opposing directions at the same time. So if you're holding left and then you press right, or if you're holding right and you press left, if you're holding up and then you press down, etc. Proper SOCD cleaning requires that if you're holding one direction, let's say left for example, and then you hold forward, you should get a neutral input, meaning the game will register you holding both buttons as you pressing nothing. There are a lot of input techniques that you can perform on the MixBox, like very specific ways you can dash, you can hold forward, tap back very fast, and then get a dash in Street Fighter and any game where you have a forward dash input by performing techniques like this. The PXN X8 does not have proper tournament legal SOCD cleaning. So that means if I hold back or I hold forward and I press the opposing cardinal direction, it will default to the last direction that I picked. There are some problems execution-wise with this. I've had problems in Tekken with back forward inputs because the game is just having a problem like registering my input because there is no neutral input in between. I have had problems with trying to do things like that dash mechanic we were talking about. You cannot perform that on this because it doesn't have proper SOCD cleaning. If you press any direction and then you press any other direction, it will just, as far as opposing directions go, default to the last direction that you picked. So if you look up MixBox techniques or hitbox techniques and you see some of the capabilities of those controllers execution-wise, you do need to know competitively that the PXN X8, one of the caveats of it being a budget option is that you are not able to do that on this controller. However, combos on this controller, once you get accustomed to it, are very fun and very easy. You have, again, the WASD is very helpful for getting very specific directional inputs outside of having that ability to introduce SOCD cleaning into your combos. Now, throughout this so far, I've shown you different examples of combos, me performing them in Guilty Gear, in Tekken, in MK, in Street Fighter. It works exceptionally well execution-wise. Now, with that SOCD complaint, I have heard rumblings on the internet through Amazon reviews that it is actually possible to find old firmware for this device. If you can find the version 1.09 firmware for the PXN X8, that you can actually get a version of it that has proper SOCD cleaning. I was not able to find it. I contacted the support team and let them know that I was looking for that older version of the firmware, and they sent me the general firmware that you just find on their site if you look for their drivers. So I don't necessarily know if they understood my issue. If I am able to find that old version of firmware and get this to work, I will link it in the comments somewhere, and I will also just leave a comment letting you know that it's there. But as of recording this video, I have not found firmware that allows the WASD keys to have proper SOCD cleaning. So as far as I'm concerned right now, that is just an issue that I'm going to be having with this controller, not having access to some directional techniques that I would prefer to have with a controller like this that I would have if I spent the extra money on the MixBox instead of this budget alternative. Outside of firmware updates, the next question is going to be, well, how well does it work on all of the different peripherals? This is advertised to work on PS4, PC, Xbox 360, Xbox One, basically every Nintendo Switch even. On PC, it does have some issues when you're plugging it in. You are going to need to update the firmware, and you might have to mess around with your Steam settings to get Steam to recognize the controller in the first place. We can look at the properties of it here. I'll actually pull these up for you. So as you can see here, it comes up in my control panel as just a fighting box. If we go over to the controller settings and check the properties of it, you see right here on my point of view hat, here I am pressing the directional keys. It is recognizing the keys. Whenever you are not in a game, it does recognize these as just general you pressing buttons on the keyboard. So you see when I press left here, it'll tab me back to my settings. But in game, it will recognize all directions with no problem. It's harder to showcase it here, which tends to be a little annoying. And all of the buttons clearly are picked up there. But again, they just, it's weird the way in which the computer recognizes them, because you'll get weird stuff like this when you're out of game where you can navigate. If I'm in Discord, I can go back to old messages and navigate Discord with this. Who knows, maybe I could even mod this to work as an actual keyboard if I can manage to make that work with 8 buttons. But it does register fairly well. Now, one of the problems is when you want to use this on a console, there is actually a weird workaround you have to use where you have to connect this to a controller for some consoles. It's mostly going to be Xbox and PlayStation where you'll have to do this. So you'll see right in the back here, there is a USB port. I don't know if my camera will focus on it. There it goes. There's that USB port there. They do send you a couple of wires. So they send you a micro USB to USB extension, and they send you USB to USB-C. So you will get some free wires when you purchase this. What you'll have to do ideally, if you want to connect this, let's say if you wanted to play this on PlayStation, is you would have to then take this cable, which again, this setup could be annoying, but this is what you get with budget options. Connect this cable now into the device here, not backwards where you break it, and then connect the cable to your peripheral of choice. So I would connect it then to something like a PS5 controller or whatever could recognize it. Then this controller will map itself to this controller, and then you would be able to play games. On PS4, that can be annoying. I've generally mainly used this on PC because it is annoying to have to plug it in and then also plug it into a different controller and then be able to play the game. That's very obnoxious to do. So I generally would not recommend this to players who would want to use this on console. I think this is great if you're going to use it for PC, because on PC, once you do get it set up, it is just plug and play. But outside of that, it is a pain continuously to have to grab your other controller. It kind of defeats the purpose of buying a separate controller in the first place. But again, that's one of the caveats you get with a budget option. This is $60 instead of another $300. So you might feel like I did, Hell, if that's the worst thing I have to do is plug it into another controller, it's not the end of the world. But I will say personally, it is annoying to have the controller plug and play on my PC and then again try to go over the console and have to do this whole workaround. Let's go ahead and start looking at the guts of this thing because I have a story that's going to be important when it comes to this. All right, so when you want to take this device apart, you don't really actually have to be concerned about these 4 screws here. These are just essentially screws that hold in these bumpers. You could take them off if you like, if you would like this to be more level or for whatever reason these annoy you. You're really concerned about these 6 smaller screws here. Now, again, these are really small screws. I'm only using this screwdriver bit here to show you this, that this won't really fit in here and get these screws. You'll need a specific edge that's small enough to get in there. You'll have this issue generally with a lot of controllers. If you wanted to take apart a PS4 controller, you'll run into the same issue. But you'll need a screw head that has the capability to actually get in here and take these screws out. Once we take out all 6 of them, we can get into the internal guts of this machine and start really looking at how it operates. Okay, once we've successfully removed all the screws, you can kind of just take this black plate off, and then we get into the internal guts of this machine. It's fairly simple how it's rigged together. You can see right down here is your 3.5mm audio jack. If you wanted to listen sound through the controller, the quality of which will depend, of course, on the headphones that you're using. It's a standard headphone jack. There's nothing crazy about it. The PCB, very, very small. Also good though. One of the problems I had personally, one of the main reasons I wanted to show the internals of this machine was the fact that when I first received it in the mail, my general heavy kick button wasn't working, and it's because this pin was loose. It knocked loose after about like 5 minutes of play. Now, if you end up with the same experience, if you buy it and run into the same issue, it's a simple fix. You can essentially go to the button that gave you an issue, pull the pin out, as long as you do it like very safely and securely there, and just gently reassert it back in until you know 100% like, yep, that's in, and then you can leave it. I generally did that with all of the buttons to make sure they were all working, and then they were fine. Then obviously you see your slot here for the cable. You're gonna wanna make sure that's slotted in pretty well when you need to close the device again. But it's generally very simple. This is gonna be the back, obviously, for your main board up here that would have your home start, select option, L3, directional input versus left stick input. It does have L3 and R3 buttons on there, which helps a lot, especially in training mode. You know, it's not like this stick is special in having that. Sorry, this box is special in having that in it, but it is nice that it has that there. But yeah, again, generally very simple guts to this, nothing too crazy. And if you wanted to take these buttons out, there are as simple as just pushing down on the button here. Obviously, you would take the pin out, you'd be able to remove it. So you could, if you wanted, essentially, even though it wouldn't be the easiest thing to do, completely replace the PCB board, put in your own 30mm buttons, and have your own experience with it. But I think for a budget option like this, if you're buying something like this, you're not really generally the person that wants to do that, because that is, again, spending more money. If you are a fan of the case for some specific reason, you can, by all means, feel free to go ahead and do that. The case is very lightweight, which again is going to come down to preferences for different people. It depends whether or not that's something that you're interested in. Some people like heavier cases. You could, of course, stick something heavier inside of this, but there's not a lot of extra real estate inside of the box as far as, like, you know, having a giant metal plate or something that you could put down to weigh it down. But the possibilities are there. I would not feel comfortable representing that as an impossible option. It is to some degree moddable, but it again depends on how much you're really willing to spend money doing that. And if you're gonna mod, I think there's better boxes that you could use as a base rather than this PXN X8 version. So now, getting down to brass tacks, is the PXN X8 Fight Box the budget option of your dreams? Would I recommend it to you? Here is my full recommendation. I think if you are a PC player that wants to experiment with the possibility of what using a MixBox would somewhat feel like, this is a good option for you. Or ideally, you know what, I can say this, not even necessarily if you're a PC player, if you're not going to be switching devices all the time, this is a decent option to have set up on one device consistently. Going back and forth is quite frustrating with this, and I wouldn't recommend using it to that capacity. I think if you, like I do, I play on console and I play on PC, but this is generally a PC controller for me. When I'm playing on PC, this is what I'm going to be using for a bit. It is fun. Execution on this is very fun. There are some caveats, of course, as I mentioned before. Without proper SOCD cleaning, you'll run into issues, but you can learn to work around them. And of course, whenever you can afford to actually get the MixBox, oh boy, how happy you're going to be when you have proper SOCD cleaning. The difference is night and day when you play on one of those. There are a lot of other budget options, and I want to go over them as I'm able to collect them between the Empress, the Hitbox, the MixBox, the Junkbox arcade version. There's a lot of different leverless peripherals that I want to go over, even some arcade sticks. So this is going to be the first video on my channel where I'm really discussing when hopefully as we progress in the future, they'll be higher quality. And then one day I can do a full comparison of every device that I have in my house. But yeah, do you want to purchase the PXN X8? I really think it's up to you to decide whether or not, with its caveats, this is the right controller for you. Again, I would say yes, mostly for PC players or players who are not going to be switching platforms a lot. I would keep in mind that it does have its issues, but it is a budget MixBox controller that provides a budget MixBox experience as best as I can represent it. Feels like I said nothing saying that. I hope you guys got something from that statement. If I had to score it out of 10, I'd give it a 6. I think it's a solid 6. I think it does what it advertises that it does, so I can't really knock points off of them for saying that this controller is something that it's not. They advertise it as a budget alternative. It comes with that budget experience. So guys, let me know what you think in the comments down below. If you want to see more videos like this, let me know. As I acquire more devices, I'd like to do them if this is interesting to you. And if you have questions for me in regards to the PXN X8, use my comment section as a way to let me know what questions you have. I can find the information for you. If you can't find it, I don't mind looking it up and checking it for you later. With that said, you guys have a great night, and feel free to check out my stream where I'll be playing some Street Fighter matches with this controller throughout the coming months, up until I can afford a MixBox Universal. Have a safe day, guys. Keep playing fighting games. I love you all to death. Peace.